So Congress starts meeting. Congress was the body that arranged that treaty. Remember, that's their responsibility. Congress was the one that appointed our negotiators, the people who negotiated the treaty, the people who went over to Paris and sat with England and argued for more than a year to hammer out a treaty. As I told you, the treaty was very favorable for the United States. Our negotiators did a very good job. And you have to give credit for that to Congress, because Congress was the body that appointed them, that gave them their directions, told them what to do, and so forth. And so, yeah, we got a really good treaty. It was very positive for America, and you kind of have to give credit for that to Congress. So, okay, we now have, we're an independent country, sort of a country, or a collection of 13 states, however you want to look at it, but there we are. And Congress is going to start meeting, and one of the first things they have to take up with is what to do with that land in the West. As I told you, there's two aspects of that land in the West. One is that land as property, where Congress is the owner of the property, and second is that Congress is the government for the West, for that area out there in the Northwest. All right, so let me look at the first thing first. Congress owns the land. To deal with that, Congress in 1785 passed what is called the Land Ordinance. The Land Ordinance. They use the word ordinance that sort of means the same as a law, but they didn't want to call it a law because it's not clear that they can pass a law. I mean, they're not a government. But anyway, they passed the Northwest Ordinance. The Land Ordinance of 1785. And Congress decided what to do with the land that they own. And the answer is pretty simple. They're going to sell it. I mean, that's what you do if you own something, you sell it. That's a really important decision. It may not seem like too big a deal, but it's sort of obvious, but it's an important thing. It's important for several reasons. First of all, that means that now Congress can get some money. They still can't tax. And, what they can do and what they are doing officially is asking state legislatures for money. State legislatures can tax. And so Congress can officially ask the states for money. And they're doing that, and every year Congress would go through this procedure to figure out how much each state's supposed to pay, and they worked out formulas where this state owes this much and this state owes, and they sent every state a bill and said this is how much you owe, and every state would just ignore it. I mean, the hell, we're not going to give money to Congress, So Congress can never get any money from the states, and they can't tax, but they own a lot of land, and they can sell that land. Now, that's not as good as taxing, because eventually you're going to run out of that land. I mean, that's the disadvantage of relying on wealth that is not ever going to get greater. You've got so much land, when it's gone, it's gone. But there's a lot of it, and it's going to last for a long, long time. It's going to be a source of income for Congress. So that's an important thing. That kind of changes things. That's why this decision of Virginia was so important, because Congress now owns land, and it has a chance to get money even though it can't tax. So that's a plus. That's a big deal. That's important. And the other thing is the way that Congress decided to sell the land. And it's complicated, and I don't think I'll take the time here to go into the details of this. This land ordinance spells out some fairly complicated procedures for selling land. Let me just get to the main point. The point is to sell the land only to people who will actually live there. What Virginia had been thinking about doing when they had originally thought that the land was going to be theirs until Parliament came along and said, no, the land belongs to the Indians. The way that Virginia had been approaching it was to give land to big companies, to private parties. to let private individuals who would most likely be friends of the legislature, let them have big blocks of land and let them do with it what they want. And then they may sell it to whoever, and so then they're going to make money off of this. And that's what it was all about. It was to enable people to make money. As private businessmen in a middle role, they're going to have this land and then they're going to sell it and they're going to make money. And who they sell it to, well, who knows? Who cares? That's up to them. And Congress, in the passing the Land Act, the Land Ordinance says no. It can only go to people who will actually live there. What does this sound like? Maybe you can think about what we've been talking about as part of America. Who it's going to go to are family farmers. America has always been a land of family farmers up until that time. That's what the whole country was based on. Almost all Americans were family farmers. And that's what Congress wants to keep in the land ordinance. They say that only people who are going to live on the land and work it themselves with their families. We're not going to have anything like England with big estates. We don't want this land to be given to some big company, and the big company is going to own the land, and then they're going to have people working on it, and they're going to have tenant farmers like in England, and they'd become like the big land barons of England. No, not in America. America is a land of family farmers, and the land ordinance is designed to continue that, to perpetuate that, to keep working in the American tradition. So they set up procedures to try to decide that land could only go to actual farmers, to the farmer and his family that's actually going to own the land and live there and farm it and be part of the great mainstream of American landowners. That's what it's about. Now, frankly, they didn't do a very good job of it. They made the requirement for land too big. And I won't get into the numbers, but they just said you had to buy a certain amount of land. And they really required you to buy more land than you would ever possibly use. So that kind of it's nice to be able to get all that land, but frankly you have to buy the land and you're buying more than you could ever possibly use. So it really didn't encourage people. It wasn't real attractive. It wasn't real easy to do it. And then the price that they set was a little bit too high. Again, I won't take up the time to go through numbers, but just say the principle that the land was a little bit too expensive. So they really didn't sell much land because it was so much per acre, and then you had to buy so many acres, and it just didn't work. But hey, those are easy problems to solve. All you have to do is just change the numbers. You just tweak the numbers. You just say, okay, originally it had to be 640 acres. Let's make it, eventually they got it down to 160 acres. They cut it in fourth. And then they made it possible to buy the land in installments, so you don't have to come up with that cash in the front, and just do things to make it easier to sell the land. So they didn't get it right the first go round, but the principle was there. And once you get the concept established, you get the principle that the land is going to go to middle class families, then it's just a matter of getting the numbers right. And so they had to tweak the numbers. And over the years they eventually got it right. And over the years, Congress sold a lot of land. We acquired more land, as we'll see in this class. We're going to eventually acquire more and more land. And we always follow the same principle. We follow the same basic rules of dividing the land up and marking it off and determine how much everybody buys and so forth. We did it for the whole continent, and it worked extremely well. For 100 years, a main source of revenue for the federal government was the sale of land. Over a 100-year period, sale of land brought in about half of the money that the federal government got. It fluctuated a lot from year to year. Some years they sold a lot, some years not much. Congress frequently tinkered with the details, and so that's a complicated story. And we won't get into the details of the complications, just stick with the basic principle that Congress, from 1785, from the get-go, Congress was committed to maintaining America as a land of middle-class farmers, and they made land available in the West to sell to farmers who were actually going to be the farmers. They're the actual middle-class farmers. And that was a commitment. Now, after 100 years, we started running out of land, and by the 1880s, about the only land we had left was, desert and land that wouldn't be useful anymore. And so then things had to change. But that's after this class, so we won't deal with that. For that time, for the rest of the years that we cover, sale of Western land was proceeded by the way Congress set it up in the land ordinance, and it worked. It was a positive thing. Congress did a good thing, even though maybe in the short run they didn't, but that was just because they didn't get the numbers right. So you just change the numbers. So that's a plus. And it's done because Congress wants America to be a nation of middle-class farmers, and they want people to own land, which means they want people to be able to vote, because in order to vote, you have to own land. And that had always been true. That was true in the colonial days, and that was true in 1785, and that was true for many years after that. And what Congress wants to do is to have people own land, because that means they can vote, which means they can elect representatives, which means we can have a republic. So that's what you need to see is going on with this Land Act, this land ordinance. Congress is trying to make sure that America remains a republic. And to have a republic, you got to have a lot of voters. If you're like England, which is, Americans could look at England as a hopeless case. I mean, England is terrible. That's exactly what we don't want to hear in this country. We don't want to be like England. Because in England, very few people own land, very few people can vote, so they don't have a republic. They'll never have a republic. They're a hopeless case. Forget about them. We're America. And the key to being America was that people have land. They're all middle-class farmers, or at least most of them. All middle-class farmers. And that means that everybody can vote, so we're going to have a strong republic, a strong a system of elections based on land ownership and people being representatives and being the government. And you're going to have a government based on the consent of the governed. Now, maybe I should just take at this point to remind you, don't get too carried away with this, because we got to always put in here the reality that land ownership, we all want the people to be on land ownership, but let's just remind ourselves, before we go any further, I'll get back onto this track of how glorious America is and what a great country it is and everything, but let's just remind ourselves we're only talking about white males. And one of the things that's really good about your book, and one of the reasons why you should read chapter 6 carefully, is because it shows what's going on with, first of all, non-white people and with women. And the book, chapter 6 has a lot of information there about what's happening with Indians. Non-white people don't count. As far as America is concerned, we're a nation of white people, white males. And so the book kind of offsets that. That's why I want you to read the book, and I think it's really important to read the book. I'm not going to take the time. I don't want to duplicate what the book says. Professor Foner does a lot better than I do, and he's got a lot of information there about what's happening with Indians, and who are sort of not even there. They don't even figure in. I mean, all of this talk about America as the land of a Republican government and everything. Well, what about the Indians? Well, let's not talk about that. But Professor Foner does, and of course it's an important part of the reality. And he also talks about what's going on with slaves. Let's remember, or let's talk about America as a land of freedom, commitment to liberty. Liberty means you own land. Most people are committed that they have their freedom, that they have liberty because they own land. That means that you can take care of yourself, so everything is great, and we've got liberty. But let's not forget that a very substantial part of our population were actually slaves. So let's not get too complimentary to ourselves here. And then, of course, also women. Half the population, if biology is right, and I think it is, half the people are going to be women, and they don't sort of figure in. They're there, but they don't count. So that's why I want you to read the book carefully and learn about what's happening with the non-white males who greatly outnumber the white males. So let's keep that in mind, but we'll get back to the, now I can get back onto the talking about how, America is this great land of freedom, and we have this whole commitment to Republican government, and that means we need to be a nation of small farmers, which we always have been, and the Land Act is going to, the Land Ordinance is going to try to preserve that by making sure that the land goes to people who live there, not to others. Now, having done that, Congress now has to pass a law to set up the government. In 1787, Congress passed what's called the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance. So that's the second law that Congress passed to deal with land in the West. And this, they set up a government. And they officially established what they called the Northwest Territory. At this point, the land only is that area north of the Ohio. The land that Virginia actually claimed and that they gave to Congress was only for the Northwest, just the area from the Ohio River up to the Great Lakes and from the Appalachians to the Mississippi. And so Congress designated it as a territory. They called it the Northwest Territory, established by the Northwest Ordinance. And they said that territory, the government, would be in the hands of a governor who would be appointed by Congress. Congress would appoint a governor. And then the governor would appoint territorial judges to actually administer the law in the territory. And the judges would then hire marshals. I mean, marshals are adjuncts to the judge, and they would be responsible for law enforcement. Wait a minute. This is not a Republican government. A governor is appointed by Congress. Well, okay, so it's not. But the key to understanding the Northwest Ordinance is it's designed to be only a temporary government. It's only transitional. And the reason that it's done is that as of 1787, there are very few people living in the Northwest Territory. Now, I said people, because I'm going to go along with the thing, but you understand that means that there's no white males out there. There's a lot of people, but they don't count. So you can't really have a republic until you have some people to vote. So at the time, it's going to be governed by a governor, but when it gets to be large enough, it's going to become a state. And as a state, it's going to have a legislature, and it's going to be a republic. So, yeah, think of the Northwest Ordinance as not yet republic, but it's a transitional thing until we get enough people living there to have a government. Now, my director here is telling me that the time is about up, so I'm going to have to quit, but we'll come back for the second lecture of the week at your convenience.